There are moments in the entertainment industry that stop everyone in their tracks. Moments where talent is so undeniable, so raw, and so completely unexpected that even the most hardened professionals lose their composure. Simon Cowell has spent decades building a reputation as the man who feels nothing, the judge who says no when everyone else says yes, the executive who built empires out of talent and walked away from failures without blinking. But in 2018, a 13-year-old girl from a tiny former mining village in northeast England walked onto the America's Got Talent stage and did something nobody had managed to do in years. She made Simon Cowell feel something he wasn't prepared for. And what happened next? The signing, the silence, the slow disappearance, and the eventual reckoning is one of the most quietly devastating stories the music industry has produced in recent memory. Courtney Hadwin was not supposed to be a sensation. She grew up in Heselden, County Durham, a small, working-class community where dreams of international stardom are not the kind of thing people talk about over dinner. She was born on July 6, 2004, raised by her parents Paul and Anne-Marie alongside her younger siblings, and by all outward appearances, she was an ordinary, slightly shy schoolgirl who happened to love singing. But from a young age, music wasn't just a hobby for Courtney. It was the thing that made her feel most like herself. She began singing seriously around the age of 9 or 10, performing covers at school events and local open mic nights. And when a video of her singing at a school lunchtime performance was uploaded to Facebook and went locally viral, something shifted. People who heard her couldn't quite explain what they were experiencing. Her voice didn't match her age, her face, or her quiet demeanor off the stage. It belonged to someone who had lived through things a child hadn't yet encountered. Her family understood quickly that what they had was something rare. Her father took on extra work to fund singing lessons and travel costs, driving Courtney across the north of England to auditions and competitions. Her mother recognized the potential before most people outside the family did. Courtney trained at multiple local academies, competed in Teen Star UK, won Hartlepool Performer of the Year award, and by the time she was 12, she had performed in front of over 18,000 people at the South Tyneside Festival. She appeared on The Voice Kids UK the following year, reaching the final and impressing everyone who witnessed her. By early 2018, her reputation had grown enough that AGT producers came looking for international talent and found her. She was 13 years old, and she was about to walk into the most significant moment of her life. What happened on that AGT stage has been viewed over 300 million times, and even now, watching it back carries the same electricity as that original broadcast. Courtney walked out looking exactly like what she was, a nervous teenager who seemed to want the floor to swallow her up. She answered questions in a soft voice, smiled awkwardly, and gave no indication of what was coming. Then the music started. What emerged from that small girl was enormous. Her voice was raspy, powerful, and filled with a kind of emotional weight that seasoned performers spend entire careers trying to manufacture. She didn't just sing the song. She inhabited it, moved through it with a physicality and an abandon that left the audience on their feet within seconds. Simon Cowell, who has seen thousands of auditions and maintained his composure through nearly all of them, sat rigid in his chair with an expression that people in the audience recognized immediately. He had been caught completely off guard. His poker face, so carefully maintained across decades of television, had slipped when the performance ended. He called her a lion. Howie Mandel hit the golden buzzer without hesitation. And just like that, the world had a new obsession. The weeks that followed were unlike anything Courtney or her family had experienced. Her audition played on news segments and talk shows around the globe. Headlines called her the next Janis Joplin, a generational talent, a 13-year-old who sang like a woman twice her age. She advanced through the competition with performances that consistently stunned the judges and a worldwide fan base that grew with every episode. She placed 6th overall in the competition, a result that surprised many who felt she deserved higher, but the placement almost didn't matter. America's Got Talent had given her a global platform, and Simon Cowell had seen something in her that he wasn't willing to let walk away. Shortly after the live shows concluded, he signed her to Psycho Music in partnership with Arista Records. Courtney described a moment as a dream come true. She was 14 years old, and she was officially a recording artist on one of the most powerful labels in the world. From the outside, It looked like the beginning of everything. What it actually was, as Courtney would only be able to articulate years later, was the beginning of a very complicated and painful education. The music industry is not built for teenagers, and it is certainly not built for teenagers who possess an artistic identity as strong and specific as Courtney's. Her voice had never been polished or manufactured. It was gritty and soulful and deeply personal, the product of years of independent development rather than industry grooming. But the machinery she had entered didn't particularly care about that. What it cared about was product, and product required deadlines, packaging, and the kind of commercial shaping that left very little room for a young artist still figuring out who she was. Almost immediately, Courtney found herself in back-to-back writing sessions with producers and songwriting teams who had a specific vision of what she should sound like, a vision that didn't always align with what she felt inside. She was being pushed toward a polished pop-soul crossover that fit neatly into radio formats, and the further that direction moved from her raw instincts, the more disconnected she felt from the music she was supposed to be making. The physical demands compounded the creative frustration. Courtney was still a teenager living at home, still attending school, still trying to maintain some version of a normal life. But the label schedule did not account for any of that. She was traveling between the United Kingdom and the United States constantly, expected to be media-ready at all times, conducting interviews, shooting promotional materials, and recording tracks on a timeline built for adults. A typical day might begin in England and end in an American studio, surrounded by executives and industry professionals who were all older than her, all more experienced, and all with their own ideas about what her career should look like. She later described feeling like a character being directed in someone else's story, performing emotions and adopting sounds that didn't feel genuinely hers. The girl who found her voice singing at school lunchtime events was being asked to exchange it for something that would sell better. Simon Cowell, for his part, operated the way he always operates. He spotted the talent, made the call, announced a signing, and then returned to his role as the most powerful judge in televised talent competition. He was not a personal mentor to Courtney. He never positioned himself as one. His function in the industry is to identify exceptional ability and connect it to the infrastructure that can monetize it. And in that narrow sense, he did exactly what he was supposed to do. But what he perhaps did not consider, or did not consider carefully enough, was that the infrastructure he was connecting Courtney to was one that routinely consumes young artists before they have the tools to protect themselves. He was the gatekeeper. He made the introductions, and then the door closed behind her and the machine took over. The silence between them in the years that followed spoke volumes. As Courtney struggled through her label experience, feeling increasingly controlled and increasingly distant from her own artistic identity, there were no public statements of support from the man who had championed her so loudly. The industry moved on to its next discovery, and Courtney navigated her situation largely without the kind of guidance that might have made the difference. She began to withdraw. Her presence on social media dwindled. Mainstream media coverage of her career slowed, and then largely stopped. Fans who had followed her journey with such enthusiasm began asking questions that nobody seemed to be answering. Where had she gone? What was happening with the music? Was she all right? The silence felt heavy and unexplained, and in the absence of information, speculation filled the space. The truth was both simpler and sadder than any rumor could capture. Courtney was struggling, not in a dramatic, headline-generating way, but in the quieter and more persistent way that happens when a young person is asked to carry more weight than they are ready for. She was experiencing creative burnout, the specific kind that comes from spending months working on music that doesn't feel like your own. She was emotionally exhausted from the demands of constant travel and performance. She felt isolated in a world that was supposed to be exciting, but in practice felt relentless and impersonal. And she was grappling with something fundamental. The question of who she actually was as an artist, a question that the industry had effectively prevented her from exploring on her own terms. She needed space, so she took it, quietly and without announcement, retreating from the noise to try to find her way back to what music had always meant to her. The process of rebuilding was slow and deliberate. Courtney began working with Grammy-winning producer Kevin Bowe, a collaborator with a long history of working with artists who possessed real soul and genuine emotional depth. With Bowe, There were no top-down deadlines, no industry voices insisting on a particular sound, no pressure to be something she wasn't. There was just a work, honest, personal, rooted in her own experience. She began writing songs that reflected what she had actually been through: the loss of control, the identity confusion, the pressure to perform before she was ready, the anger and the grief and the resilience that had brought her out the other side. Songs like Monsters, You Only Love Me When I Lie, and Breakable emerged from those sessions, and they sounded nothing like the polished pop-soul crossover the label had been pushing her toward. They sounded like Courtney, raw, emotional, and completely unfiltered. By 2025, the transformation was complete and undeniable. Now 20 years old, Courtney reemerged as an independent artist with a clarity of purpose she had never possessed during her label years. Her project, Little Miss Jagged, with a release date announced for September 2025, was immediately recognized by critics as her most honest and powerful work to date. A stripped-down, mic-less video performance of You Only Love Me When I Lie circulated widely and left viewers stunned. Not by the spectacle of a young girl surprising everyone with an unexpected voice, but by the depth and authority in artists who had earned every note through genuine experience. Journalists describe her sounding like thunder and burning like fire. Fans who had followed her since the AGT audition described feeling like they were finally hearing the person who had always been underneath the industry packaging. She had come home to herself, and it showed in every bar. She signed with a new management team, Total Artist Management, and began booking performances across the United Kingdom and Europe, with American dates in planning. In April 2024, she had performed at Carnegie Hall, handpicked by the legendary Clive Davis to open a gala with a Janis Joplin tribute, a moment that carried particular weight given how often her name had been linked to Joplin since that first AGT audition. The performance was widely celebrated as evidence that she had not only survived the industry's handling of her early career, but had emerged from it with her talent not just intact, but deepened by the experience. The girl Simon Cowell had called a lion had grown into something that lion metaphor could no longer fully contain. And then there's a question of Simon himself, and whether the years that passed between that golden buzzer moment and Courtney's independent reinvention ever gave him cause to reflect on what had happened. Reports and social media clips surfaced suggesting that he had broken his characteristic silence on her story, that in an interview he had paused in a way that was uncharacteristic, sighed in a way that betrayed something he usually keeps carefully suppressed, and said, with his voice reportedly cracking, that they had expected too much too soon, and that she was a kid, and they had failed her. Whether or not those specific words were spoken in a verifiable, documented context, the sentiment they capture reflects something that many people who watch Courtney's trajectory have felt independently. The industry took a 13-year-old with one of the most extraordinary natural voices in a generation and put her into a machine that was not designed with her well-being in mind. The result was years of struggle that could have been avoided with more careful stewardship. What Courtney has built in the aftermath of all that is something the machine never could have manufactured. She has a genuine relationship with her audience, not the transactional kind built on promotional campaigns, but the real kind built on honesty, vulnerability, and the willingness to show the process rather than just a polished result. She talks openly about mental health, about the emotional demands of creative work, about the importance of boundaries and self-care. Her social media presence is candid in ways that resonate with young people who have grown up watching artists perform perfection while quietly falling apart behind the scenes. Courtney performs the opposite of that. She shows the mess and the uncertainty alongside the talent, and in doing so, she has become something more valuable than a viral sensation. She has become someone her audience actually trusts. There's a version of this story that ends differently. A version where the label gives a 14-year-old artist more time, more creative freedom, more genuine mentorship. A version where the machinery adjusts to accommodate the human being at its center, rather than demanding the human being adjust to accommodate the machinery. A version where Simon Cowell's role in her story includes not just the discovery, but the protection. That version didn't happen. What happened instead was harder and longer and more painful. But what emerged from it is arguably more powerful than anything that easier version could have produced. Courtney Hadwin at 20 is not a manufactured star. She is the real thing, shaped by difficulty, honest about her scars, and creating music that carries the full weight of everything she has been through. The industry tried to tell her who to be, and she refused to stay that person. That refusal cost her years. But it gave her something no label contract could ever have provided: her own voice, on her own terms, finally and completely her own.